order Paul Scully to move the motion.
Thank you, Ms Vaz. I beg to move that this House has considered e-petition 118060 relating to the income threshold for non-EU citizens settling in the UK. And can I say it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Ms Vaz. First of all, I thought I'd actually just read the petition into the record so that people following this in Hansard later on can see exactly what we're talking about this afternoon. The petition was entitled to scrap the £35,000 threshold for non-EU citizens settling in the UK. And it goes on to say, in April 2016, the Home Office and Theresa May are introducing a pay threshold for people to remain here after already working here for 5 years. This only affects non-EU citizens that earn under £35,000 a year, which unfairly discriminates against charity workers, nurses, students and others. This ridiculous measure is only going to affect 40,000 people who have already been living and working in the UK for 5 years, contributing to our culture and economy. It will drive more workers from the NHS and people from their families. This empty gesture will barely affect the immigration statistics. It's a waste of time, money and lives. This is the first time the UK has discriminated against low earners. £35,000 is an unreasonably high threshold. The UK will lose thousands of skilled workers. Now, if I return to my own words, and my own views may be slightly different. There's also a tag on this as well, because the Home Affairs Select Committee have actually looked at this as part of a wider report in terms of skills and how the Tier 2 visa and other visa categories actually affect skilled workers as well coming into the country, to which the government responded in February of this year. Now, I've been a member of the Petitions Committee since it was set up in May, and this is one of a number of petitions that have really hit the public's imagination since the e-petition system came into place. However, this is probably the first one, I think, that from memory, that's come to debate that's actually been pro-immigration. I've actually led on one that wanted to stop all immigration now. We obviously had the quite interesting discussion about a certain Mr. Trump, which related to largely to his comments about immigration in the US. But this is the first one, as I say, that is looking at immigration from a positive point of view and a specific part of the policy as well. So I hope that we have an interesting debate on how it actually affects people, the contribution that people make when they come to this country as well, and bringing their skills, not just economically and culturally, but also what we need to do in order to control mass uncontrolled immigration, because I think there's a consensus of agreement largely that we always need to do more to address that situation. I do have a few concerns about the wording of the petition, and I think it's a general thing that I would say to any petitioner that's considering putting something on the e-petition website. Some of the wording was a little bit not what I would have chosen, certainly. You know, talking about a ridiculous measure, because I think when it says a ridiculous measure is only going to affect 40,000 people, well, actually I think a lot of people who are concerned about immigration will say 40,000 people and trying to control 40,000 people, which is effectively just over 10% of the current net migration figure, about 15%. Is quite a lot. It's quite a high percentage of those figures when we're talking about trying to control immigration as a whole that the government is looking at.
Would you allow me before he moves on?
Please.
Can you confirm that the reason the government is not able to apply a measure like this to European Union citizens is precisely because we are European Union citizens and we are prevented as a consequence from discriminating against free movement of EU citizens? Does he agree with me that it would be better and fairer and more just on everyone if we operated migration on the basis of British citizenship, so we could treat people fairly from wherever they came in the world?
Thank you very much, and I very much agree with that, and I'll be speaking about that later. I do think that we are acting with one arm tied behind our back, effectively, within the structures of our immigration policy. When the petition carries on going on about the fact that it's an empty gesture and it's going to barely affect the immigration statistics, well, I think if you're talking about 40,000 people, I think that's more than just barely affecting the immigration statistics. So I don't think it's a waste of time. But then it goes on to talk about the fact that it's the first time the UK has discriminated against low earners, and that £35,000 is an unreasonably high threshold. And I suspect that the debate will tease out the various types of occupations that this may or may not affect. Although, please, yeah.
Give way. Of course, the occupations that this will affect is absolutely key to this debate. We've got a situation now where nurses will not be able to be recruited from abroad. STEM teachers will not be able to be recruited from abroad. So we've got gaping holes in these areas that simply won't be able to be filled.
Thank the Honourable Lady for that contribution. Actually, I think you're second-guessing what I was just about to say, because I would contend that actually the shortage occupation list, which is actually the second part of the Tier 2 visa rules, actually does take that into account. And so when the petition goes on about nurses, actually they are, nurses are on the shortage occupation list. Charity workers that are mentioned on the list as well, on the petition, tend to be dealt with on the Tier 5 visas, the temporary workers. And students that are again mentioned tend to be work on the Tier 4 international students visas. So there are a few what I would consider factual inaccuracies, but nonetheless, you know, there are some real concerns. I know there are some concerns of various occupations, and it's right that actually, first of all, that people make those their representations known so that we can actually look at that. And bearing in mind this is the Migration Advisory Committee that actually look at that list on a regular basis. It's really important that they continue to do so. Please. Yeah.
The economy relies on a wide variety of skills, and not all of these skills are paid similar rates of pay. Does the honourable member agree with me? A banker in the city is going to earn much more than, say, a classical musician. So one threshold to blanket all industries is inherently unfair.
If that was the case, then yes, it would be. But again, I think that's where the shortage occupation list comes in, because, for example, you will have a situation where a classical ballet dancer, for example, has an exemption of £20,800. So they won't be affected by the 35,000 limit. They have a far lower threshold to get it. Now, I can't tell you the market rate for a classic ballet dancer, I'm afraid, but there are exemptions, and that's why I think it's really important that the Migration Advisory Committee keep that list in close inspection and close review on a regular basis to cover the cases and the examples that the Honourable Lady talks about. So, Tier 2, effectively, it's working for, it's looking to address the issue of skilled workers. We know the majority of people, if we can get past the people that say that, you know, stop all immigration now, I think most reasonable people will consider that immigration plays a positive role in this country, as I say, both economically and culturally. We know that we bring in some fantastic migrant entrepreneurs. We bring in some people, as has been said, nurses, pharmacists, people work in the cultural industries of music and dance and arts and these sort of things as well. They really do contribute to the UK and the fabric of this country, as well as, in some situations, doing the jobs that we can't find the skills in this country to do, but that can actually help train and help upskill our own citizens as well. Please.
In response to his honourable friend a few moments ago, he talked about extending this to European Union citizens. Would he allow other European Union member states in which 1.26 million UK citizens live do the exact same to UK citizens?
Mm-hmm. I think at the end of the day, when we're talking about the European Union, we're looking at being able to control our own borders, and we're looking at the skills, the skilled people that we want in this country. And I think it's absolutely right that my personal view is that I would like to leave the EU in order to be able to achieve that over the world from other countries. But within this context, within this debate that we're having at the moment, the best we can do is actually look at tackling immigration from outside the EU and working out the skills that we need, working out the various industries that need particular help from outside, and working through the Tier 2 visa rules, both in terms of threshold, but also in the various exemptions that we've talked about.
Will you allow me before he moves on?
Please.
Will you agree with me that the key point here is that the burden of proof lies on those who wish to end, or rather to continue to discriminate in favour of people from Europe against those who are outside the European Union? That's the crucial point, that the EU puts us in a position where we are discriminating against non-EU citizens, and that should end.
You know, I mean, I've actually dealt with quite the curry industry. This is may sound slightly random, but bear with me for a second. The curry industry, a lot of people representative of the curry industry complain of the fact that they have 2 restaurants a week closing down out of the 10,000 or so that they claim to be around the country. There are actually lots of different reasons for that being the case, but one of them is their failure to attract skilled chefs. And what they always tell me, what the associations, the trade bodies always tell me, is that they can actually have someone from another European country that's unskilled, that can come over here, get a job, at the expense of a skilled chef with experience from Bangladesh, say, for example.
In what way would raising the threshold to 35,000 alleviate that problem in any way?
Frankly, it wouldn't, which is why I wasn't going to make that case. But actually, by leaving the EU, it would mean that we wouldn't actually have to pinpoint all of our immigration policy on tackling the immigration from outside the EU, because frankly, that's the only bit at the moment, that's the only lever we have to pull. We can't do anything about immigration from within the EU because of the freedom of movement of people. And so it means that people from Bangladesh, it means that people from India, who are frankly going to dominate the world economy for the next few decades, are at an unfair disadvantage to, say, unskilled people from within the EU. So I wasn't going to make that case at all. But coming back to the Tier 2 visas, the skilled works only applies to workers within graduate occupations. Now, obviously, with the way that that our skills are changing and our skills agenda are changing over the last few years, more and more occupations are falling into that category. I mean, nursing itself, years ago, didn't need a degree, but now it does as nurses take on more and more responsibility, and they're taking on more responsibility that are more akin to doctors, actually, in many cases. And rightly so, that they're highly qualified, highly skilled, and they certainly do need to make sure that we can attract the very best into this country. When you're actually looking at skilled work, anybody that wants to take someone on under this category needs to have a resident labour market test, so to prove the fact that we can't actually fill those jobs from our domestic market. PhD level jobs are exempted, and as I said, shortage occupation lists are exempted as well. Please.
Domestic market, would that then exclude the free movement agreement we've had with Ireland since the early 1920s and every Irish citizen?
Well, it's an interesting point, but I mean, at the end of the day, what I think that by leaving the EU, all I was saying about leaving the EU is that we have control of what we decide to do. We've had control of what we decided to do with Ireland for a number of years, but well before we've were members of the European Union. So, coming back to the Migration Advisory Committee recommendations, they actually looked at this in December 2015, recommending, I believe, a cap of about £30,000. They acknowledged the fact that the government's core objective in tackling all this issue is to significantly reduce the level of economic migration from outside the EEA. Now, the PM has made it clear that the focus of the government is to train domestic workers, and that's absolutely the right long-term plan to have. When I talked about curry chefs, for example, earlier on, I know the government have talked about setting up training colleges and apprenticeships and these sort of things, and long-term, that's absolutely the way to go. I think because the curry industry and a number of other industries have actually struggled to really get to grips with the change in government policy over the last few years in terms of adapting to it. They've been trying to push against it, and to the point that now the rules are starting to come in, starting to bite. They've realised it's actually too late to make those changes that they could have done over a number of years. So I hope in all of these industries that the government can, even if they don't reverse a policy, that they'll actually be understanding and sympathetic to these industries and actually work with industry leaders and trade bodies to make sure that where possible, compromises can be made in order to help them cope. The curry industry that I keep talking about, it's worth £3.5 billion to the UK economy. It employs around 100,000 people, and it would be a tragedy to actually see that level of UK industry wither on the vine, frankly. So Tier 2 has a role to play. Yeah, people have, when they tackle immigration, and immigration on the doorstep in my campaign certainly was the number one issue. It was the thing that came up time and time again. And everybody was saying to me, you know what, we need a points-based system. Well, actually, we have got one. We've had one since 2008. And the Tier 2 visa system forms part of that process, actually, because you still need to be able to show your income and a number of other categories as well, and you will get points on that basis to work out whether you will be accepted onto a Tier 2 visa or not. Now, a number of us would have got the briefing from the Royal College of Nurses. I know it's something that's of concern to them. It's already been raised today. You know, I'm glad that they are on the shortage occupation list, because it is important that we are able to, especially at a time when we are trying to recruit more nurses and bring more nurses into the National Health Service, that obviously it takes time to train nurses, so we've got to find them from somewhere. And it's important, therefore, that they are on the shortage occupation list. Otherwise, according to the RCN, 3,365 nurses would have been affected if they hadn't have been on that list. But it's got to, that shortage occupation list has got to iron out unintended consequences. But I think it still provides the default position that the UK should supply its own workforce wherever possible. And that's, I think, the right thing to do. Now, bearing in mind with all of this, the Tier 2 visa system is only one tool in controlling immigration. The government's done a number of very, very good things on immigration, closing down 920 bogus colleges, slashing 45,000 visas from the further education route, and cutting family visas by a third, by restricting access to public services through the Immigration Acts and cutting abuses. These have all had an effect. But there's still obviously more that we can do. For the number of reasons that I've said, we only have a certain amount of avenues that the government control. Unskilled labour from the EU isn't one of them, unfortunately. The UK economy is the biggest pull factor for migration. We've talked a lot in other debates in the main chamber about welfare changes and these sort of things, but ultimately the biggest pull factor for migration is the state of the UK economy. The fact that we've had the fastest growing economy in the Western world, we've been creating more jobs in the UK than the rest of Europe put together. When you have double-digit unemployment in parts of Southern Europe, of course the UK is going to be an attractive place to come. So of course we actually need to do more to do on immigration. So I think as I've been flitting around, I think it's important that we have a good debate. I hope the Minister will, as I say, look kindly on some of these industries that are struggling to keep up with the pace of change. That although we've obviously got to keep on controlling mass uncontrolled immigration, which affects infrastructure, it can affect social cohesion in certain situations, I hope the Minister will at least acknowledge the fact that some industries and some occupations need comfort and do need support and frankly, the right words to realise that they are valued in the UK economy and throughout our public services. And I look forward to a vibrant debate this afternoon. Thank you.